Jerri, thank you so much for coming on Fraud Busting. I am so thrilled that you're here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Talking about fraud is one of my favorite things to do. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, you talk a lot about it because not only talk but write, and so I don't want to mess up your intro. So why don't you tell us exactly what you do, and we'll go from there.
Well, I actually have a tagline. I say that I'm Jerri Williams and that I am on a mission to show people who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues.
Oh, that's a mouthful. So really, you do it all. Really, you do it all. Now, you're retired FBI, and you worked mostly in economic crimes, like financial crimes. And so let's start. Let's just start from the beginning. How'd you end up with the FBI?
It was a fluke.
Really?
There's so many. Yeah, when I interview the different retired agents, I always ask them why and when you joined the FBI, and so many of them say that they wanted to be FBI agents since they were little kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not the case for me. I never thought about being an FBI agent. And, even as a young adult, I only really thought about FBI agents as being white males. And so I didn't see myself in that role. This is back in the early 1980s.
Okay.
I'm old, So
you don't look old, so that's okay.
So I was working as a juvenile probation officer, and I saw this newsletter because again, in the 80s, there's a lot of women networking, and it said that the FBI was actively looking for more women and more minorities to join the FBI. And at the time, I looked at myself and I said, more women, check. More minorities, check. And so I thought, you know what, I'll call and, see what they have to say. And the agent who answered that phone really recruited me. When he heard about my background and what I was doing, he thought that I would make the ideal candidate. And he really wouldn't let me off that phone until he made sure that, I was interested, and that when he sent out the application, which at the time was like that thick, that I would complete it. And so he really, really, took the time to make sure that I knew that this was a good opportunity for me. And so I applied, and it was like a whirlwind. It usually takes up to a year to get in. And 6 months later, I was walking into the FBI Academy saying to myself, what have I done?
Oh my goodness. Wow. So can you talk about what the Academy's like?
Yeah, it's still the same as it was back then, but instead of 16 weeks, it's 21 weeks of training. And it entails, the academics learning how to investigate. What legally can you do? How do you do an arrest warrant? The types of different, the different types of investigations that the FBI handles the violations. So you have the academic, and then you have the physical fitness, and that's all the running and the push-ups and the pull-ups and the agility runs and all of that, just trying to make sure that you are in the best condition that you've ever been in. And that was kind of a breeze for me. I've always been kind of a non-sports playing athlete.
Okay.
At the time I was distance running, and that's a whole different story about me running the Marine Corps Marathon while I was at the training academy, 26.2 miles while I was at the training academy. So
that's a lot. Marathons it's something I thought about doing because, I have a background in cycling, and I thought when I retired, I'm like, maybe I'll run a marathon. And I was like, maybe I won't.
Well, I've actually done it twice. I did the California International too. So, but that was a long, long time ago. And my old knees won't even let me run, around the block anymore. So I'm a big power walker now. So that's what I have to do.
Good. Okay.
And then the third part, I forgot the third part of the academy, of course, is the firearms. Learning how to shoot a gun. When I went through, it was a revolver, the rifle, and the shotgun. And now, of course, it's the semi-automatic pistol and the rifle. They really don't do much with the shotgun anymore. But those are the three aspects of training at the academy.
Wow. And then where'd you end up getting stationed?
All right. So for the first 6 months, I went back to the office where I was recruited. So I
Mhm.
really got to know that recruiter who had talked me into all of
Yeah,
this.
huh?
And that was Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay.
I was living in the Virginia area at the time. So I went back there for 6 months because at the time you had to establish yourself as a government employee so that they could transfer you. And then transfer me, they did. They sent me to Sacramento, California. Yay!
Wow.
Yeah, but I was only there for about a year and a half, and then they sent me to Philadelphia, and I spent the rest of my career, the 24 out of 26 years, in the Philadelphia area.
Oh, wow. So then did you just wake up one day and say, you know what, financial crimes, that's where I'm going to shine? Or how did you end up there?
They put me there. I mean,
Oh.
a big motto of the Bureau is the needs of the Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you first come in, unless you have some special skill, you're basically a body and they put you where they want you to put. So initially in Sacramento, and Norfolk, I got to do a whole bunch of fun things like bank robberies and things like that. But when I got to Sacramento, they put me on a government fraud squad. Now, I wasn't all that excited about it. Never that year and a half I worked it. I really didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't really love it. But when I got to Philly, when I got to an economic crime squad, there's a big difference. Of course, in the government fraud, your victim is the government.
Mm-hmm.
But in economic crime and economic fraud, your victims are real people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you really get to feel as you're working the case that you're doing something that is going to have a big effect on somebody personally. You get to talk to the victim. You get to understand what the victim's going through. Even if it's a business, it's still more of a personal level. And once I started working that type of fraud, I grew to love it. Absolutely. Just found it fascinating. And as much as I enjoyed talking to the victims, I really enjoyed, meeting with the subjects and talking to them too.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you smile the biggest on meeting the subjects, and I'm a body language expert, so that's where we got to dig in. So, what's the craziest case you worked on, or maybe the craziest story someone told you? Let's dig into that.
When you get to crazy,
or unbelievable, just something where you're like, you tried that? What on earth are you thinking?
Well, remember, for most of the cases, by the time I got them, they had been successful, at least to a point.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it got to the FBI level, because the exposure or the dollar amount of the fraud, reached our threshold. So most of the time it wasn't like cray because it had been successful and it had worked. I guess the strangest one would be the one that I ended up on, American Greed, which for an investigator who works fraud, being having your case on American Greed is like reaching the pinnacle.
Well, I wanted to talk to you about that. I'm glad you brought it up. So tell us all about that. Like, what was the case? How did they contact you? Like, I want to know all the Hollywood stuff too.
Well, I was still working for the FBI at the time, and so I think American Greed must look at different cases that they see in the news, and then they find out what agency is working them and reach out to that agency, and then ask permission to interview the investigators and to get more information about the case. And so that's what happened with me. My case was the Foundation for New Era Philanthropy. I have to remember it that way.
New Era Philanthropy.
Yes.
Okay.
And the head of the group was John Bennett. And he just was well loved in the charity and donation funding industry, especially when it came to Christian organizations, whether they were schools or churches. He helped them at a time when the government funding was being pulled away, learn how to go out into the community and talk to different people and get them to donate to, your nonprofit. And so, and that's what he did. And he did an excellent job. And he held seminars and community educational programs to teach these nonprofit organizations how to raise money. And then something happened.
It always does. What happened?
Yeah. Well, he just got into some financial trouble, some personal financial trouble. And he figured his best way to get out of it. He had been kiting bank accounts, moving money from one account to another in order to, manipulate the flow of the cash. And he got caught. The bank caught him. And so he needed to replenish those accounts, and he needed to do it immediately. And so what he did is he asked some of the people that he had gotten to know who were philanthropists and donors, that he told them that he was going to start up his own funding, that he had met some, and this is going to be unbelievable, but he had met some anonymous donors, very rich people throughout the world who were just way too busy to deal with, who to fund and who not to give money to. And so they were going to put him in trust of this foundation. And in order to make sure that there were people that were deserving of their funding, they wanted them to take their funding. He would hold on to it for 6 months, which grew to a year, which grew to a year and a half. And then they would match it, whether it's $500,000 or $1 million, if that organization put the money with him so that they could prove that they didn't need it for capital investment, that this was really just, funding for special projects, the anonymous donor would match it. So he started out slow. I mean, he really did do it out of desperation.
That's a good story, though. Like, it sounds almost legit,
Yes. And he did it out of desperation just to get himself out of this financial trouble. But once it started happening, other people heard about it, and they also wanted to have their donations matched by these anonymous donors. And I guess people just loved the concept, and they trusted him. And so next thing he knows, he's bringing in all this money to the tune of $450 million.
Oh my gosh.
And as you know, and everybody who deals with fraud, there is no Ponzi scheme that at some point, it's going to collapse. There's not enough money in the world to maintain a Ponzi scheme. And so it collapsed, and he actually had borrowed some money from one of the investment firms that he was dealing with in order to try to keep the Ponzi scheme going. And they did a margin call, and he didn't have any money. And he had to declare bankruptcy. And at that time, when the SEC went in, when he was declaring bankruptcy, they looked around and they said, you know what? We think this might have been a Ponzi scheme. And that's when I got called, and it was an unbelievable case. Unbelievable case.
So what do? So your phone rings in your office. And like, what happens next? I mean, because, when we talk about, like, yesterday, I just spoke for the ACFE, and they're all internal auditors and accountants. Ultimately, some are private investigators. Like, where do you fit in that? Because really, it's a lot of paperwork and a lot of math. Like, it's not super exciting probably in the middle of it, or is it? Like, where do the kicks come from? Like, what really happens?
Well, I gave you the shortcut version, but really the FBI didn't know anything about this until they read it on the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer. And there was like the front page headline on top of the fold, of the hard copy newspaper, was that this foundation had declared bankruptcy. And there was like a line or two in there that there was a possibility of it being a being a Ponzi scheme. So we weren't directly contacted by the SAC. When we saw that, I saw the newspaper, and of course, it's very competitive. People don't know this, but it can be very competitive in the FBI, and you're assigned cases, but you also bring in cases yourself through your own contacts and people that So I was lucky because I read the paper every morning. So I saw this and I ran into the supervisor's office and said, look, can I look into this? Can I see what's going on? This might be it says here it's potentially a Ponzi scheme. I'd love to look into this. And he said, sure, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So I went over to the United States Attorney's Office and met with one of the attorneys there. And then we pulled in the SEC and then just talked about it more and more. Eventually, 2 other agents were brought onto the case. Very early on, one of the agents in our office who was a CPA, Brian Cosgriff, came into the case, and then somebody else on my squad, another female agent on my squad, Loretta Hart. So we 3, it was a big enough case that we 3 worked it together and divided it up into sections for us to concentrate on. It was a fabulous case because, throughout the case, my main role was to do the victims, to talk to the victim the victims and interview them. And probably one of the hardest part of my job was convincing them that they had been defrauded, that this was not, a true foundation, and that there were no anonymous donors. And that's how difficult it can be at times to work fraud. It's, it's an
no one wants to believe they've been taken.
No. Yeah. And that's why, and I'm sure you've talked about this before, that's why, the amount of fraud that exists, there really is no true number, because it's assumed that the majority of people who've been defrauded never even report it. They chalk themselves up as having done something stupid. It's their fault. They're embarrassed. They don't want their family to know about it. They certainly don't want their neighbors or business partners to know about it, and they just let it go. It's the bigger ones where you can't just let it go that show up. But that there were people that I was interviewing, businessmen who were known throughout the Philadelphia area as being so savvy and smart, who were crying, as I interviewed them, as I talked with them, because they were humiliated. Because not only had they put money into the Ponzi scheme, but they had gotten so many of their friends and business associates and other nonprofit organizations who were looking for money to build their organizations. He had gotten many of these men, mostly men, had gotten so many people into it, and they were just humiliated.
Oh yeah, well that's a kind of a telltale of a lot of Ponzi schemes, or and a lot of them turn out as Ponzi schemes, because your friends get you into it, and it's a limited opportunity, Jerri.
Yeah.
It's very
limited. Do it now. You gotta do it, yeah. Shh, don't tell anybody. I can bring you into this deal, and that's exactly how it was. And unfortunately, many of the people who were defrauded were in the Christian community, because the word buzzed through and, was, the secret thing, this great possibility, was put out through that community. Again, schools and churches and organizations like that. But then as the Ponzi scheme, as he needed more and more money, of course, he opened it up to more, nonprofits. And, I actually, this was the second crime novel I wrote. I wrote about this case, and I called it Greedy Givers.
Oh, yeah, huh?
Yeah, because, and this is always hard to talk about because it sounds like victim blaming, but in many of these frauds, the reason that the person was, the victim is embarrassed is because they know that they were trying to make money in a unconventional, get rich quick kind of scheme, and a lot of it has to do with, I hate to use the word, but greed on both parts. And so that's why I love the title of the book, Greedy Givers, because they were people who were giving. They weren't greedy in the sense of trying to enrich themselves. They were donating, hoping to get the money matched to give it to another organization. But they certainly were, had dollar signs in their eyes as they looked at this special opportunity that was going to make them look even better to the organizations that they had been supporting.
Wow. So you do your interviews. I mean, the guy went to jail, right?
Yeah, 25 years.
Oh boy. Now tell me this.
No, sorry. No, that's not right. He got 12 years.
12.
He got 12.
Okay.
Yeah, I was mixing it up with somebody else, but yeah, he got 12 years. Yeah.
So when you go in the case, because I know a lot of what you do is debunking myths of the FBI. And so what I see in my mind is Wolf of Wall Street kind of like FBI goes in, guns are out and everybody's surprised, and all of a sudden you take all the computers and like that kind of thing. Like, is that really what happens, or tell us about that?
Yeah, and in this case, instead of going in and taking all the paperwork and the file cabinets because they were in bankruptcy, we were able to work with the bankruptcy court and the SEC, and we just took over his offices. And so we would go there to work, to log in everything instead of having to, pack everything up and then try to remember, okay, what's in box 1BC and what room did it come from? We had everything right where it was, still labeled, still categorized, but we were able to work with those documents right in his office space, very similar to what they did in the Madoff investigation, where most of that paperwork was left in the offices for the different agencies to work on. And so that's what we did. So it's amazing, because we're looking for, of course, the smoking gun in this particular case is the fact that we're trying to prove a negative. We know that there are no anonymous donors, but we've got to be able to prove in some way that they don't exist. And so we were looking for any type of listing of anonymous donors. Then we could go talk to those people to see if they were anonymous donors. We were looking, of course, at the bank accounts to see where the money was coming from when it was matched. And of course, we found that was very easy. We found out that the money that was being matched was coming from the same bank account where the people actually made the deposits. There was no other external source of money to match with those funds. And of course, we were looking for any type of phone records of conversations that he may have had with anonymous donors and things like that. So, it was a fascinating case. I loved working on that case. And like I said, that's why I ended up writing a book to try to, in my mind, try to figure out why he did it. Why was this man who he had started his career as a drug counselor, counseling, drug addicts and working in drug rehab centers.
Sure.
And then as he got good at raising money for his own center, then he expanded out and started helping other people raise money. So he was doing good work. I mean, he was a church going person that had friends in high communities, in all religions. And then because of this financial problem that he got himself into, it just morphed into this Ponzi scheme that just got out of control. And he, talking about crazy, I guess that's not a politically correct word, so I shouldn't be using it.
Well, we're not always politically correct here.
Yeah, that's true. But his excuse at the end was that he had had a car accident that had created an issue with his brain. So he blamed his brain and said that he really thought that the anonymous donors were real.
And how far did that get him?
Psychotic episodes believed that they were real. Of course, one of the fun things we didn't have a trial because he did plead, but he didn't plead guilty. He plead, what's the word? Nola contendere, that he's guilty, but doesn't admit to anything.
Okay.
And so we did end up having a week-long sentencing. And so during the sentencing, I remember testifying. Did I testify or was that somebody? I can't remember who, but because we had the three of us, but we were talking about the fact that we had found his calendars where the meetings with the anonymous donors were scheduled as far as his administrative staff were concerned.
Mhm.
And the point was made that, you usually don't schedule out your psychotic episodes.
Right. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That is crazy. That is crazy. And it's not politically correct. So, okay. So, I know a lot of what you do is debunking the myths of the FBI, and we've brought up a couple of them. And you have a whole book on that as well, don't you?
Yes, it's called FBI Myths and Misconceptions: A Manual for Armchair Detectives.
Oh wow, because that's kind of what I am. Well, I'm not really an armchair detective, but I do a lot of video review. So, what's the number one myth?
Well, the number one myth, I think, is that the FBI doesn't play well with others. I mean, you see that myth in every movie, where the FBI agent comes in and, FBI, we'll take it from here. And that is just, it is so bad. It is so untrue. I mean, the FBI couldn't do our job without our ability to work with our law enforcement partners. And every city and all around the country, there are police officers and state troopers and other federal agencies working directly with the FBI, sitting in the FBI's office space, being paid overtime by the FBI on task forces, because we want to be able to utilize their skills and resources and have them able to utilize our skills and resources. We know those people in the community, the law enforcement agencies in the community, and they would laugh us out of the room or the crime scene if we try to come in and take over. Everybody has their jurisdictions. And so, at the end, there may be a decision made at the higher level as to how this case is going to be prosecuted. Will it be prosecuted by the state? Will it be prosecuted federally? But, we still are working many of those investigations together, especially when it comes to violent crime cases.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah. So since we're talking about myths, I'm going to share one from my angle. And I know you've done probably a lot more interrogations, been involved in a lot more interviews than I have, because, I'm a body language expert. And what you see on the movies is the cops, they start tipping over the tables and they shine the light right in your eyes. And then they expect someone to confess, right? And tell their deepest, darkest secrets. Like, there is no worse way to get someone to talk than that. And it's you got to make them as comfortable as you can.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the myths. I have a whole chapter on the myth of, the FBI uses intimidation and coercion in order to, get people to cooperate. What a myth. It's actually the opposite. We arrest somebody, we're going to ask them if they want coffee. Have you eaten yet? Can I get you a meal, You know
where that came from, and I'm sure you do, is I believe his name was Hans Scharf in World War II, and he had some American POWs, and he wanted to get him to talk, and his wife was in there baking some kind of pastry, and he ends up giving the pastries to the POWs, and they started talking. And that's how that whole thing got started, is wait a minute, you should be nice to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
For another reason too. First of all, you want them to cooperate. You want them to feel comfortable. You want them to feel heard. You want to develop that rapport. I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to help.
Yeah.
You've heard that line.
Oh yeah.
But the other thing is, once you get that information, every FBI agent is responsible for maintaining informants, cooperating witnesses, human intelligence sources. And so once you get them to cooperate on that particular case, if you're nice to them and develop a rapport, maybe you can get them to cooperate on other cases and tell you other things. And so, there's no way that the most scariest, meanest, nastiest criminal is going to spill his guts or spill her guts about a crime that they've committed just because you yelled at them and pointed them in the face, or threatened them,
Yeah.
Give them something they want, don't threaten to take away something, or put them in jail.
Oh yeah, that never works. Now let's talk quickly about because I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours. Read technique. Did you ever get trained in that at all?
What's it called?
Read. It's an interrogation technique, and it has some questionable.
No, I've never heard about the read technique.
Well, see, I've never been trained in it. I have bits and pieces of it, and I thought you might have some intel, but basically it gives you some techniques where you can get almost too chummy with your subject and end up with a lot of false confessions. So sounds like you weren't working with that, because I think the financial criminals are a little bit smarter.
Oh yeah.
Than, like they're super sharp people, like, to be able to figure this out.
Oh, they are sure. They are absolutely convinced that they're the smartest person in the room.
Oh yeah.
And when I walked in, it's like, she's an agent. I figured, oh well, then I don't have anything to worry about. And then me being very, kind and gentle. And a lot of times people say, I didn't notice I was doing this, but I'm very maternal. I have 3 kids, and just caring about them, and next thing I know, they're talking to me.
Yeah. That's the mark of someone who gets it. So, and now let's talk about what else you get, because you have a podcast. Yes. Which is fantastic, and it's is it Retired FBI Case File Review? Is that what it's called?
It's FBI Retired Case File Review.
Okay, all right, got it. And so here is why I like it so much, and we need to talk about how you're doing this, because I think it reveals your personality a little bit, and your methodology. Like you seem like super detail oriented, and you go through these cases in a way where you feel like, as a listener, you know everything about the case by the time the interview is over, and there's no stone left unturned, right? So can you talk about like some of your more interesting cases on that, some of your more interesting guests, or maybe even some of the interviewing skills that you use to get the information out in a way that's not dry and a little more intriguing than maybe in detail than maybe like a regular true crime podcast?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, I learn as much as I can about the case before my guests come. Not because I'm going to ask a lot of questions. If you've noticed, and anybody listens to my podcast, I don't say much. If I can get my guests to keep rolling and do almost a case presentation, then that's my goal. I'm only going to interrupt to clarify something, or to have them expand on something that I think the audience may need to know about. But otherwise, my guest can go on for 5-10 minutes before I say anything.
Oh yeah.
But I'd like to know the case anyway, because I want to know if I'm missing anything, or they're skipping anything that I can bring to their attention. Another thing that I do, and as a behavioralist, you'll be interested in this, is I don't use the camera. Like, we're talking now, and we're doing a podcast. It's going to be video and it's going to be audio, but I turn the camera off. I think I've done 231 episodes.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's anything you want to know about the FBI is on your podcast, right? For sure.
And of those, maybe 3, I actually had the video on, because I really felt from the very beginning that if this is going to be a presentation and I'm asking these people to provide all of this information. Remember, my podcast, I probably don't have one episode that is less than an hour.
Yeah,
so
they're long.
Some of them are hour to hour and a half. Well, I can't expect my guests to be able to remember all of that. And so I let them know from the very beginning, bring your notes, bring, everything that you need and put it out in front of you. I think as when it's a video, and you're doing that, it's hard because they want to look down, they want to look up, they want to, move this paper and shift that. And I don't know what made me realize this, but from the very beginning, I thought, no, if I'm going to ask them to really do this, I want them to know that they can move papers around, they could look down, they could pull something from there, because no one's going to see that. They're just going to be hearing what they have to say. And I think that ended up being something that allowed them to be more intimate, you know.
Oh, okay, okay.
Because they're not worried about looking at me and how they're going to look. They can kind of, you know, get back in their seat and just kind of talk and look at their stuff and just kind of remember, you know, what was going on and how they felt at the time. And when you talk about episodes that really stick out, all of them do. And I'm not just saying that, but there was one I interviewed, and I'm going to forget his name. After 231, it's kind of hard.
Yeah.
I interviewed the case agent, and his name's going to come back to me, of the Poly class abduction case. And, you know, for everyone, that was the 12-year-old girl who was kidnapped from her bedroom, you know, with her mother home and two friends over her house for a sleepover. And somebody came in and kidnapped her, abducted her. And it was the case agent of that case. We talked for maybe 4 or 5 hours as he went through the entire investigation, at sometimes breaking down, you know, when he talked about how it meant so much to him to try to get to her before something happened to her, and how he had basically a breakdown where he lost control. He was shivering. He was, you know, by the time they found him, you know, he had to be hospitalized. I don't remember for how long, a day or two, because his body he had taxed his body so much in trying to investigate this case. And, you know, as he's reliving this, and I could hear him crying, and I cut some of that out. You know, you can't, you know, I leave a little bit in there so you know that he's crying, but I don't, you know, I don't leave all the, you know, the sobs and stuff in the audio. But that's when I realized this is more than just, as a friend of mine would say, a fancy book report. You know, these are the case agents who are reliving the moment and really sharing with me and the listeners, you know, what it was like to investigate their cases. And I'm just so proud of, I mean, I know it sounds kind of conceited. I'm patting myself on the back.
Well, you should. It's really fantastic. It really is. It's that rare info that doesn't come out all that much, right? And it's not sensationalized, and it's just straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So
yeah, and I think I'm able to, what I try to do is, because some of the cases, you know, are cases that are very famous that, you know, have been on everybody's podcast. And I try to bring in the fact that I am a retired FBI agent, and to go places that other interviewers may not even know where to go. You know, you know, talking about what management was doing at the time, what kind of, you know, feedback or setback was occurring during it. And, you know, some of the people, of course, I know personally. And, you know, I know the inside story. I know the behind the scenes story too, so I could bring that up. I know I recently did an interview with Jack Garcia, who was, a lot of people know Donnie Brasco, Joe Pistone, because of the movie. Well, Jack Garcia needs to get a movie too. He was on 60 Minutes, and he has a movie deal. It just hasn't happened yet. But I interviewed him, and he's been on everybody's podcast. He was on, you know, but nobody, and one of the things about him is during his FBI career, he ended up weighing around 400 pounds. And so, of course, as an undercover agent, nobody suspected he was an agent because of his weight.
Oh, really?
But nobody, you know, asked him about his weight because, you know, it's a sensitive topic.
Oh, yeah.
But I know Jack Garcia. You know, he came to my wedding. He came
to
my wedding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't ambush him. I asked him ahead of time, you know, if we could talk about it and what was going on and what that meant, you know, and the pressure that he was getting from management. He's out there doing all of this fantastic work, you know, risking his life, But when he gets back to the office, you know, they're giving him censure letters and, you know, yelling at him because he, you know, weighs too much. And so we talked about that. So that's just an example of what I, you know, hopefully can bring different to, you know, a story that somebody has heard about. And then I also get stories and get people to talk about stories that no one's ever heard about. You know?
Yeah, well, those can be just as interesting, because if everybody knows, they kind of tune out a little bit, you know. But it's the ones that you don't hear about that there's so many of that are so fascinating. So, okay, so that's retired FBI case file review, and you're on all
the other way around.
Oh shoot, I got it wrong. Sorry.
FBI retired case file review.
I have that written down right here. I don't know why I said it wrong. So, and that's on anywhere you get your podcast.
Anywhere you listen to audio.
Yeah. And where can people get your books?
Yes. Of course, they can get them anywhere you buy books. I mean, they're everywhere, and they're available as ebooks, print books, and audiobooks.
Oh, cool.
Oh, yes. All of my books are available as audiobooks too. So again, I have 2 crime novels, Pay to Play and Greedy Giver, and they feature my flawed female FBI agent protagonist, Carrie Wheeler, and they're all about frauds. So Pay to Play are corruption, Pay to Play and Greedy Giver, and I'm working on the new one now, which is Spoiled Sport. Then, of course, you have my nonfiction, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, and I have this fun book that I did with my son, who's now 31. We did that a couple of years ago, and it's the FBI word search book.
Oh, so what's that all about?
Yeah, it's about the FBI. It's called FBI Word Search, Fun for Armchair Detectives. And it is not your grandmother's word search book, although I always say she would love it too. It is packed with FBI terms and terminology, advanced themes. Like I might have one on transnational gangs. You're searching for the words of, you know, like the Bloods or MS-13. You know, I have one on frauds, economic crime, corruption. And so I love that book, and I'm just trying to get more people to know about it because it's just fun. And of course, it also, the proceeds go towards my granddaughter's college fund. So.
Oh, well, yeah, we need that because college is no joke these days. How expensive it is.
So, I love for people to visit me on my website, which is jerriwilliams.com. And you can learn more about my books and my blog, which is about the FBI and books, TV, and movies. And of course, my podcast interviews, FBI Retired Case File Review.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so if you could leave people with one tip so that they don't become a victim of fraud, because you've seen thousands of frauds by now, what is the one tip?
You know, it's the tried and true one that we've always heard about. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is.
There you go. Easy enough, straight from the FBI. You heard it here first, people. All right. Jerri, thank you so much for coming on Fraud Busting.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. It went by so quickly. Are we done already?
We're done.